about the XYZ affair, which refers to the XYZ part of it, refers to the three people who encountered the diplomats from America when John Adams sent some people to negotiate with France, and they requested a bribe of $250,000 to meet with Prime Minister Talleyrand, and obviously our diplomats could not pay that and refused. And when they returned home, it really created war hysteria against France in the United States. And even John Adams, the president, gets swept away in that war hysteria. But eventually cooler heads prevail, and Talleyrand lets it be known that he would accept new diplomats and treat them with proper decorum and respect. But eventually, all that is for naught, as France essentially falls under a military dictatorship led by a man named Napoleon Bonaparte, making himself an emperor of France, trying to create an empire to conquer Europe. And Napoleon has the consequences of Napoleon doing this are very important for the United States, for future growth of the United States, as France no longer is really involved in the New World, as he's hyper-focused on destroying Europe. And he almost does it. He also is not as interested in his land holdings in the New World, and he sells a significant chunk to the United States to help fund his war campaign in Europe with the Louisiana Purchase. We haven't got there yet, but Napoleon, pretty important character for the United States, even though he is a dictator, military dictator. Okay? All right, so all the while, though, there's still this war hysteria that had been roaming throughout the states, and how do I want to put this? Obviously, you still have two sides in the United States government's political arena, just like there is today. Only that time it was Federalists and Jefferson's Democratic Republicans. Okay? Now, there were some, the Federalists were the ones that had the power. They had the Supreme Court, they had the presidency with John Adams, and they had the Senate. They had the power at that time. And they were facing a lot of vocal criticisms and facing a lot of criticisms in newspapers and pamphlets from Jeffersonian Republicans. And John Adams was a pretty stubborn character, very principled, and he didn't have the thickest of skin. You guys know what that expression means? He didn't have thick skin. He let things get to him badly. He would stew over stuff, and it would make him very angry. And so some new laws were created, and these are two separate acts. They're separate acts. One is the Alien Acts, and one is the Sedition Acts. The Alien Acts were actually a series of two laws that struck at undesirable immigrants. Essentially, the Alien Acts gave the President of the United States, John Adams, or any president at that time, the power to deport dangerous foreigners or imprison them for a period of time. So the alien laws allow the president to deport dangerous foreigners or imprison them. What is the definition, or what definition are we using here for dangerous? Whose definition? The president's. Might the president's Federalist definition of a dangerous person be different than the definition of a Jeffersonian Republican? Might the president simply see a Jeffersonian Republican as a dangerous person? Yeah, yeah. However, they were citizens, and so he couldn't really do much with the Alien Act to deport citizens. However, with the Sedition Acts, he could. The Sedition Acts, like I will explain this to you, and you'll be like, this is obviously not allowed. If you spoke out or were critical of a politician, particularly the president, you could be imprisoned or fined. What's wrong with this? Big time. Big time. This is a freedom that is protected, freedom of speech, in the Bill of Rights. Not just any amendment, but the first one. So, anyone, and that's what this law did, the Alien Act, or I'm sorry, the Sedition Act. It provided that anyone who impeded the policies of the government or falsely defamed its officials would be liable and face heavy fines or imprisonment. Who gets locked up into this? Who's the one paying the fines and going to prison under the Sedition Act? You think a lot of Federalists are speaking out against John Adams? Who's speaking out against him? The Jeffersonian Republicans. And as a result of that, a lot of Jeffersonian editors of newspapers were indicted under the Sedition Act. 10 of them were even brought to trial, and all of them were convicted, meaning they went to jail. So, the Sedition Act's pretty rough, pretty unconstitutional, as a matter of fact. So it's definitely, the Sedition Act definitely seems to be in conflict with the Constitution. But the Supreme Court was dominated by Federalists and was of no mind to declare this law unconstitutional. So, the Alien and Sedition Acts were definitely aimed at harming the Jeffersonians, who commanded a lot of widespread popular support. This anti-French hysteria, which is what the Alien Acts were aimed at, the French people, dangerous French people like Citizen Genet. That's who that was aimed at, and it played directly into the hands of witch hunting conservatives trying to root out evil in their administration. So, during this time, obviously, so the Supreme Court says that is not saying anything. Alien Sedition Acts, whatever. We can look back on this and say, obviously, that's unconstitutional. How can this be allowed? Well, it's not like the Jeffersonians are just going to take it and just accept it, because they're the ones that are having a great deal of trouble with it. And so you see an effort to oppose the Alien and Sedition Acts being put forth by people like Thomas Jefferson. And a lot of resentful Jeffersonians, this is what they did to refuse the Alien and Sedition Acts. They're not just going to take it lying down. All right, so what the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions are it deals with what they refer to as nullification. Nullification. Do you guys know what nullification is? Yeah, they're just going to ignore or do away with a law they feel does not apply to their state or is unconstitutional in their opinion. So this is a big-time states' rights issue, making the states more powerful than the federal government. So it has to do with states' rights. The powers of the federal government should be limited according to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. So, the issue of states' rights is an important issue that remains all the way up to today. You see, as you could look at the electoral map that's still in question in our own election right now. So, state about how people vote. But that's what nullification is all about. The states have to accept what a law they feel is unconstitutional. Well, this is important because it has grand implications for the future when the federal government starts handing down laws on slavery. Because southern states say, I don't think I like this idea of slavery, or I don't think I like having this limited by the federal government. We're going to nullify that. Or when they continue to, the idea of a bank, more southern, Southerners are more of a, agrarian society, and they don't like the idea of that big, powerful bank. So this is really a brilliant formulation of extreme states' rights view regarding the Union. And, they ultimately, nullification is almost always the first step toward the final step, which is secession. You know what secession is? We're going to leave the Union. We're just going to leave. So nullification is the first attempt. Like, we don't like what you're doing. You can't make us do it. And then if they make them do it, then there's more resistance until ultimately secession. The Civil War is not the only time states have threatened to secede. It's like the 20th time states had threatened it. Okay, we've already talked about states threatening to secede. Talked about Massachusetts wanting to split. Even Virginia, early in American history, they wanted, parts of, East wants to separate from the West. So, you still have your Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. And then in the presidential election of 1800, the differences between Federalists and Democratic Republicans were sharply etched. And, you have your Federalist candidate, the incumbent, in the election of 1800, John Adams, versus the well-known Democratic Republican, Thomas Jefferson. And, Thomas Jefferson's not he doesn't do big rabble-rousing speeches. He's not a stump speaker, much better writer than he was a speaker. But he was a master political organizer through his incredible ability to lead people. Jefferson's strongest appeal was to the middle class and to the underprivileged, liberal-minded people of the United States, even though he himself was an aristocrat. Many of his contemporaries called him a traitor to his class because he died pretty broke, but he was an aristocrat, a landed man who had name and money. But Jefferson cherished an uncommon sympathy for common people, the downtrodden, the oppressed, the persecuted. And, he wanted a lot of power in government to be retained by the states so that the people can have access to that assistance easier and in a more direct way. So, he's in intimate contact with local affairs. And above all, he advocated for rule by the people. He favored government for the people. He did want people to. He wanted to attach literacy to voting, though. He only wanted educated people to participate. So he wasn't the most liberal-minded guy. But universal education would have had to precede universal suffrage, and that was a very expensive thing to do, especially in his state like Virginia. Okay, but ultimately, who wins the presidential election of 1800? Thomas Jefferson wins. Thomas Jefferson wins, becoming the third president of the United States. In doing so, he has one of his powers as president is the power of pardon. So what happens to all those people that were locked up under the Alien and Sedition Acts? Pardon, you're free to go. And they walk out of jail. Okay? He pardons them all. And then he says this Alien and Sedition Act, they're gone. They're done. Thomas Jefferson, I love his presidency. You guys are going to find it fascinating. Because Thomas Jefferson for all of the wonderful things he's done for our country, and for all a strong, he wrote the Declaration of Independence, very strong, principled man. He and his key, the key ideas, the things that are fundamental to him: strong states' rights, weak federal government, and a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Those are things that he holds very dear. He violates all his principles as President of the United States. Okay? He wants to keep the power of the federal government small. He did more to increase the power of the presidency than any other president before him. Now, there had only been two, but he increases the power of the president. He wants a strict interpretation of the Constitution. If it's not in there, we can't do it. He does more that's not in the Constitution than any other president before him. And we'll look at all kinds of examples of this. All right? So, he wants to do things to favor farmers and agrarian-type people. Thomas Jefferson, he unwittingly does all this stuff. It just happens to him. He does more to increase manufacturing in the North than any president before him, even though he's an agrarian, I want to help the common man kind of guy. So, lots of interesting things to look at when Thomas Jefferson becomes president. One of the more fascinating presidencies. I like to describe Thomas Jefferson's presidency as consistently inconsistent. Consistently inconsistent. Because he's always saying one thing and doing the other. And it's not that he's a bad person or he's a liar. He just really is caught up in the nature of how the presidency evolved in the United States. Okay? All right, so questions on Unit 2. So you'll have your test tomorrow. It's 50 multiple choice questions. You get a minute per question. If you're at home, the test will be open all day. If you're in here, you can do it in here if you really want to. I guess you could do it whenever, as long as it's done tomorrow. I don't really mind. So make sure you do it tomorrow in Schoology. It'll be one of your first grades on the new 9 weeks. And if you have questions between now and then or at any time, feel free to shoot me a message on Schoology or write me an email or whatever you need to do, and I'll be more than happy to help you out.